Hey everybody. All right, I am here. This is Amy, Editor-in-Chief of the Austin Common, and today is the first day of early voting. And so we're going to be doing a whole election conversation on here, answering any of your election questions. I've got my handy dandy vote mug right here, ready to get started. I'm curious if anyone has already gotten the chance to vote. Early voting started this morning. But, it is one of these off-year elections, as we call it. We don't have a big presidential election or statewide election happening. And so sometimes these kind of elections get overlooked. But there's lots of important things on our ballot. And so that's what I wanted to spend some time this morning or this afternoon, rather breaking down for you all so you know exactly what's going to be on your ballot and how to go vote. And please ask any questions that you have. You can just enter a comment or use the little question and answer feature there at the bottom of Instagram Live. Here to help for today. Okay, so to start, a little bit about dates and general voting information. So early voting did start today on Monday, and it lasts all the way through October 29th, which I believe is next Friday. And then Election Day itself is November 2nd. And I get this question a lot about early voting. Early voting, you don't have to do anything special. It's not like mail-in voting or something. You don't have to apply for it. You don't have to fill out a certain form. Early voting is just an extension of voting. It just provides people more dates and times to get to vote. To be more flexible with your schedule. So all you have to do to early vote is simply show up at your polling location and vote. And if you live in Travis County here in Austin, you want to go to votetravis.com. That's where you'll find all your information about polling locations, wait times, what times the polls are open and close at each day. And then if you live in Williamson County, it's wilco.org, has that information as well. So that's key. You're going to want to jump on there and check that out. Okay, so that's some voting basics. Next, I want to go over what is going to be on your ballot. So if you live in Austin city limits, you're going to have 2 local propositions on your ballot, Prop A and Prop B. And then you're also going to have 8 statewide propositions on your ballot, and those are propositions 1 through 8. So the statewide propositions are numbers, the local propositions are letters. So everyone in the state of Texas is going to have those propositions 1 through 8, and they're all constitutional amendments or changes to the Texas Constitution, and they're on the ballot because the Texas legislature put them there. And a lot of them, I have to say, are a little obscure. Statewide issues is not totally what we cover here on the Austin Common. But I would definitely recommend that if you're looking for information on those statewide propositions, you go to vote411.org, which is run by the League of Women Voters, and they have voter guides for all 8 of these propositions. And the Texas Tribune also has voter information about all 8 of these propositions. But just to give you a little taste of them, some are of the very obscure nature, like this one, Prop 1, the constitutional amendment authorizing the professional sports team charitable foundations of organizations sanctioned by the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association or the Women's Professional Rodeo Association to conduct charitable raffles at rodeo venues. Kind of obscure one. But then there are bigger ones and a few that have come out from COVID. So, for example, Prop 3 reads, the constitutional amendment to prohibit this state or a political subdivision of this state from prohibiting or limiting religious services of religious organizations. So obviously that one is a direct result of seeing a lot of religious institutions and churches shut down and their services shut down because of COVID. And so that's why you see something like Prop 3 on the ballot there. So again, propositions 1 through 8. I'm not going to go through all of them on this call because we're going to focus on the local stuff. But if you go to vote411.org again or Texas Tribune, you can find all the information about those statewide propositions. Okay, now on to the local ones. So first up is Prop A, This one is the more controversial of the two propositions that are on your ballot. You've probably seen a bunch of road signs or gotten mailers in your mailbox or political ads on Facebook or Instagram about this one. It's all about policing. And it is on the ballot as a result of a citizen petition from the group Save Austin Now. If people have heard of that. Save Austin Now is the group that put the Prop B back in May 2021, which was about homelessness, on the ballot. So this is so confusing. I don't know why we do this, but every time we have an election, we use the same letter. So you just have to remember that whenever there's a new election, this is a completely different slate of propositions than we had back in May, even though they're still called Prop A, Prop B, etc. So Save Austin Now put the homeless camping ban initiative back on the ballot in May, and now this is their proposition again for this November, Prop A. And really this is all about police staffing. So I'm just going to run over the basics of what would happen if Prop A passes, or kind of what's included in the ordinance that would go into effect if Prop A passes. So the big thing is an increase to the size of our police department. If Prop A passes, the Austin Police Department would have to maintain a ratio of at least 2 officers per 1,000 Austin residents. 2 officers per 1,000 residents. It also would require police officers to spend at least 35% of their time on community engagement, which basically means not responding to 911 calls. It also would require an additional 40 hours each year of in-service training and continuing education for officers, as well as a new incentive program for officers who speak multiple languages, mentor cadets, or are in good standing. So that's kind of the basics. The main thing here is an increase to the size of our police force. Now, the main topic of conversation around this has a lot to do with budgets. So our city's chief financial officer put together his estimates for how much passing Prop A would cost the city, and he has a low scenario and a high scenario. In both cases, though, it's a pretty high dollar value, which is really where a lot of this conversation has focused. So in that low scenario, the lowest estimate, we're looking at about $54.3 million a year in order to hire about 403 new officers over 5 years. So $54.3 million a year to hire 403 new officers. That's the low estimate. The high estimate is $119.8 million a year in order to hire 885 new officers over 5 years. So again, 119 million, about 885 new officers. That's a lot of officers and a lot of money, which is really where, like I said, a lot of this debate has come into play. And just to put things into context for people, because I'm sure a lot of people don't, these, when you toss around these big numbers like 54 million, 119 million, they're really hard to understand what that means. Like, is that a lot of money? And so I just wanted to share a little bit of the breakdown with you all so you understand what we're talking about here. So for context, the most recent city budget that our city council passed back in August of this year included a $442 million police department budget. And so people might have remembered back, not this past summer, but the summer before, we had a lot of protests and activism in the city around the size of our police force, and City Council decided to actually make some budget cuts to our police department budget. However, this past legislative session, our Texas legislature basically made doing so illegal. And so when it was time for City Council to come back and put together our new budget for this year, they reinstated all of those cuts that they had made to the police department and some. I think this year's budget of $442 million is actually $10 million more than the police department budget we had 2 years ago before any of those cuts were made in the first place. So APD's budget was fully restored. And then just for context, if Prop A passes, APD's budget would increase about 12 to 27% over this year's budget. depending again on that high or low scenario, if that makes sense. And then just for, again, a little bit of reference or context here, because I think dealing with these numbers can be so confusing. The city of Austin, we have a $1.2 billion general fund budget. The general fund is like where all of the more discretionary funds go. So we have a $4 billion budget, but that includes things like Austin Energy, which is our city's electric utility, Austin Water, which is our city's water utility. They have their own budgets that can't really be moved around between other city departments. They also generate their own income. You pay your electricity bill, they provide electric services. So we tend to isolate those components of the budget because they're not as flexible and are really dedicated to that one purpose. The general fund is where we have a bit more opportunity for discretionary spending and is where a lot of the debate comes into play. So this past year, our general fund budget was $1.2 billion, and APD's portion was 37% of that. So the police department does already consume the largest single component of spending in the general fund here at the city of Austin. And that general fund is what pays for kind of all the things you think about, I guess, for a city doing, which is providing police services, fire, EMS, parks, libraries, public health, kind of all of our social services as well are all wrapped up in the general fund budget there. And this, like I mentioned, is where a lot of the debate comes into play. Because passing Prop A would mean an increase to the size of our police department budget, likely actually above 2 officers per 1,000, because of that rule in there where 35% of police officers' time be spent on community engagement or not responding to 911 calls. So estimates are actually that we would have to have more than 2 officers per 1,000 in order to meet that goal as well. And really where a lot of the crux of the debate comes in, or a lot of the opposition to Proposition A has come into play, is from groups that represent other parts of that general fund budget or are concerned about it, because it is a limited pie. And the Texas legislature also has been making a lot of restrictions as to how much we can grow our tax base and that pie. And so if you guarantee that a certain percentage of it always goes to police, you're making it a lot harder for all the other departments and having a lot less wiggle room. And so that's where a lot of the crux of the debate or the conversation against Prop A has been, is that APD already takes up the largest piece of that pie. And if we were to pass that, it would take up even a larger piece of that pie, which we would never be able to change, even in times of lean times in the city, even in times of budget cuts, even if our city got a lot safer, you can't cut back the police. And so that's kind of been a lot of the core of it. The Austin Firefighters Association and the EMS Association have both come out against Prop A for this very reason. They feel like it'll threaten their budgets and kind of these other parts of public safety. And so have a lot of environmental organizations, parks-based organizations, groups that kind of represent and advocate for all the other things that our city does, have been really concerned that passing Prop A will lead to inevitable budget cuts to all these other departments. Just flipping through my notes here to see what else is key to share. Oh, again, for some reference, in Prop A, it talks about getting to 2 police officers per 1,000. Right now, the estimates kind of vary because we are having a lot of people retiring or leaving APD, but we have anywhere from about 1.6 officers per 1,000 to about 1.8 officers per 1,000 right now in the city of Austin. And this kind of feeds into, I think, a lot of questions I've been getting or things people might have been wondering, which is, if you've been reading the headlines, our police chief has been talking a lot lately about a staffing crisis at APD. And you might have seen that certain specialty units of APD have had to be disbanded so that those officers can go out back on patrol. And our 911 call response times have increased. And there's been a lot of concern about that in the community and some questions about why is that happening. There's 1,000 different answers for that. And, the folks who I think are advocating, the folks who would advocate for us to have less police in general, there's an argument to be made that it's just about how to structure our police department differently. But if you look at the other side as well, a lot of this, as the police chief has described and the Austin Firefighters Association has described, is we have a little bit of a short-term staffing difference here. In the past year and a half, we have had a record number of police officers leave APD. The Austin American-Statesman had it at about 130, which is a pretty high number. It's also not unique to Austin. Police officers have been retiring throughout the entire country for a whole host of reasons that we don't necessarily have to get into today. But COVID has changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and there's been a lot of changes in many different workforces. But anyway, we've had a lot of retirees from APD, and at the same time, we did decide last year as a city to pause our cadet classes, which is the way we were able to bring in more officers. And that was a decision that was made because there were a lot of concerns and complaints coming out of our police academy. City Council voted unanimously to pause those cadet classes while changes were made. And some changes were made, and now cadet classes have been reinstated. So we are training new officers under a new program and curriculum, but there is a gap, quite frankly, right? Like, we had all of these officers retire during this time and we weren't onboarding new ones. And so there is a little bit of a lag, behind how many police officers we currently have budgeted and how many police officers we have on the police force today. So I think we have like a 10% or maybe 12% vacancy rate at APD. That does not mean that we do not already have the budget to hire more officers. It just means that we are waiting for people to get through the academy in order to hire those officers, because it's a long training program. You can't just hire an officer just in the blink of an eye. And so that's kind of where you see some of the difference, and I think there's a little bit of confusion there. Passing Prop A does not necessarily immediately solve that problem. There's just a bit of a gap between how quickly we can onboard officers. Now that could be a policy conversation. It is up to City Council if they wanted to figure out a way to speed up the academy or add more academy classes, but that could happen regardless of Prop A. It doesn't have to be tied to that for one reason or another. So that's just kind of another policy conversation that could be had, but that's a little bit of why we see that gap. So we do have the budget to bring back on more officers than we have today, but they have to go through the academy first. Okay, so if you check out for more arguments for and against, we have, if you go to the Austin Commons page after this, we do have our traditional rundowns and guides for both Prop A and Prop B, and you'll be able to read arguments for and arguments against each of the initiatives, so you can check those out. But like I said, a lot of the debate comes down to, the pro Prop A folks have said they want larger police. And, I think this quote from Councilmember Mackenzie Kelly describes that position pretty well. She said, quote, "I can assure you that we have passed enough money through social services programs that have no reason to be provided by municipal government, that we have the money at the city to prioritize public safety and provide additional staffing." And that's a quote from Councilmember Mackenzie Kelly, District 6. Priorities, really. I think she lays that out pretty clearly there. The pro-Prop A people, policing is the number one priority and potentially, and is worth the cuts to other departments, right? Arguments against, I'll use another council member's quote, Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes. Here's what she said. Quote, "If Prop A passes, all of these services will be on the chopping block. We're talking about neighborhood public libraries, neighborhood swimming pools. Instead of promoting public safety, Prop A would do the exact opposite. It would force the city to cut essential services instead of investing in a comprehensive public safety approach that actually addresses the root causes of crime." End quote. And again, that's Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes. To check out more quotes from different folks that are for and against Prop A, again, you can go to our Instagram page and learn more about that. And just to wrap up a little bit about endorsements and who's supporting what here with Prop A. Like I said, Prop A was put on the ballot by Save Austin Now. It's being supported by Councilmember Mackenzie Kelly from District 6, as well as a few former Austin mayors, Lee Leffingwell, Mayor Lee Cook, and Ron Mullen. And against Prop A, a pretty large coalition of community groups have formed against it under the banner No Way on Prop A. And they include the ACLU of Texas, the Travis County Democratic Party, the Austin Justice Coalition, Save Our Springs Alliance, Austin Parks Foundation, Austin Firefighters Foundation Association, and quite a few more on that list as well. So that is Prop A. It is a bit of a long list there, but if you have any questions about anything I just talked about, feel free to, like I said, add a comment or put anything there in the question app. Just think of it in your mind, Prop A, policing. That's what it's about. All right, now we're going to shift gears a bit and go into Prop B. And Prop B is all about parks. And like I said, of the two propositions, it's a little bit less controversial than Prop A, but still really important. So, Prop B has, if you were to actually read the ballot language, is extremely long and wonky and confusing, so I'm going to break it down a little bit for you here. If Prop B passes, basically what it would allow is for City Council to negotiate a land swap, selling a piece of city-owned parkland for new parkland, more parkland, and a maintenance facility. And this is a little confusing, but I'm going to try to explain it the best that I can. Basically, the whole reason this has come up is because the city currently has a Parks and Recreation maintenance facility that they operate on the corner of Lakeshore Drive. Let me check where it is. Oh yeah, Lakeshore Boulevard and Pleasant Valley Road. And it's a 9-acre piece of land that's owned by the Parks Department, but it is not currently being operated as parkland. It is a maintenance facility. Trucks are parked there, used for storage, things like that. It's not accessible to the public, but it is owned by the city of Austin. It's also right next to Oracle's headquarters. They're right there along Lake Austin. You've probably seen it before, big, huge building you can see from the lake. And they really want to expand into this piece of land. And they want to buy it from the city of Austin. And it's a really valuable piece of land. I think the last appraisal put it at like $33 million. This is valuable. And they want it. And so this is kind of a proposal that they have put together, is that if the city would sell them that piece of land, in exchange, they would provide the city with, they would buy the city a 48-acre piece of land, which is in East Austin along the Colorado River, and it's currently owned by Driveway Austin Motorsports. I don't know if people have been out there. It's just east of 183, and it actually is currently operated as like an amateur race car track, and there's like a 1.7 mile paved loop on it. It's also right along the Colorado River. It's in East Austin, and it's right next to John Trevino Jr. Park, which is a 330-acre piece of parkland, again, on the Colorado River that the city owns, but it has not really opened it up to the public yet. And so the idea is, if the city could acquire this piece of land, it would make John Trevino Park bigger. It could potentially provide an entryway or opportunity for the city to start to open up this piece of parkland in East Austin, which is a part of town that doesn't have as much parkland as the rest of the city. And the amateur race car track would be turned into like a Veloway style bicycle track. If anyone's ever been out to the Veloway, that's a bike only track by the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. So this would kind of be an East Austin version of that. And in addition to the city getting that 48-acre piece of land, Oracle would also pay to remove a maintenance facility that's at Fiesta Gardens. So Fiesta Gardens is right there along Lady Bird Lake in East Austin. And there is, again, another Parks and Rec owned maintenance facility there that's keeping a lot of really prime piece of parkland. It's right along the water. It's in a beautiful location, inaccessible to the public. And so Oracle would basically pay to remove that maintenance facility from Fiesta Gardens and return it back to publicly accessible parkland so that it could be enjoyed by more Austinites again. And then the third thing Oracle would do is basically pay to build an entirely new maintenance facility to replace the one that was there on Lakeshore Boulevard and the one at Fiesta Gardens. So that's kind of the whole package and proposal all tied up into one. There's a little bit of controversy here because technically a lot of this you won't see in the ballot language. And that's because technically anyone can place a bid on this land. So if Prop B were to pass, City Council would put out a bid for people to buy that 9-acre piece of parkland, and anyone could technically place a bid on it. Now, Oracle, however, has already put together this entire proposal and plan, and they're very likely to be the buyers of it. And this is what they've said they would give the city in exchange for the $33 million piece of 9-acre piece of parkland there. Technically, anyone could place a bid on it, but this is what Oracle has said. They would bid on it. And so there's been a little bit of controversy there that this is a little bit unfair because the ballot language has been crafted really, really tailored to what Oracle has already said they would give to it. So most likely, no one else is going to place a bid on this besides Oracle. So that's where a little bit of the conversation is, and why you might be seeing words like, oh, we might get this 48-acre piece of parkland, or it doesn't mention anything about that driveway Austin land, because they have to keep it vague in the ballot language and say, well, I'll tell you exactly what it says. Shall the City Council be authorized to convey or lease approximately 9 acres of parkland currently used as the Central Maintenance Complex, located at 2525 South Lakeshore Boulevard, through a public bidding process, where the total value of the bid is equal to or greater than the appraised fair market value of CMC in exchange for at least a minimum. At least 48 acres of waterfront land contiguous to an existing city park, the cost or construction of a new maintenance facility for the Parks and Recreation Department on other city-owned land, and partial or full funding for the removal of Fiesta Gardens' existing maintenance facility and restoration of that land to parkland. So as you can see, they don't explicitly call out the proposal that Oracle has put together, but they basically do by any other name, right? By naming this unnamed 48 acres of waterfront land. So a little bit of controversy there. But in the end, I would say our city's environmental and parks advocacy community has really gotten behind Prop B. It's being endorsed by the Austin Parks Foundation, the Trail Foundation, the Travis County Democratic Party, the Austin Environmental Democrats, whose main feeling is this swap would allow us to gain more parkland, more accessible parkland, and especially in East Austin, which is a part of the city where we don't have enough parkland. A quote from the website of the PAC, or the Political Action Committee that has formed in order to advocate for this, Grow Austin Parks, says, quote, "Austin parks are being loved to death. We have the opportunity to vote for more parkland with a vote for Prop B." So that's kind of where Prop B ends up lying there. All right. And with that was a lot of talking. That's Prop A and Prop B. Again, if anyone has any questions, please take a moment right now and ask it. Feel free to leave a comment or put anything in the question box there, and I'm happy to answer. Also, if you're watching this later on repeat, you can feel free to share any questions you have. Happy to answer them. Again, bottom line with all of these things that's so key is these are really important decisions for our city. And these kind of off-year elections, they get so few voters that turn out for them. And we're talking about major decisions here. We're talking about whether the city, we're talking about parkland, which is land that is owned by all of us. And we're talking about policing and our city's budget. That's our tax dollars. That's how we want our public safety system and infrastructure to work in our city. These are big questions that we all have a right to have an opinion on, right, and share. So I really encourage you to please try and vote if you are able to. And if you're struggling or not really sure what to do or what any of these things mean, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. And again, early voting lasts through October 29th, and election day is November 2nd. And again, you can find information on those statewide propositions at vote411.org or Texas Tribune. And If you live in Travis County, you can go to votetravis.com for information on polling locations. And if you live in Williamson County, you can go to wilco.org. And I think that's just about it. But just remember to get out there and go vote. Thank you all for taking time on your Monday to listen to me talk for a half an hour. And like I said, feel free to message us if you have any questions, and we'll get you the info you need to know. All right. Bye, everyone.